The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, right when the first real cold was settling over Sudbury. I remember because I had just taken my tea out to the back porch, something I still did out of habit, even though the arthritis in my hands made holding the mug uncomfortable by November. My sister's lawyer, a man I'd only met once at her bedside near the end, spoke in that careful, measured tone lawyers use when they're delivering news that will change everything. My sister Evelyn had left me her estate. I stood there on that porch with the birch trees going golden copper all around me, and I couldn't speak. Evelyn and I had been close our whole lives, closer after our parents passed, closer still after her husband died a decade ago. She'd never had children. She said once, over a bottle of Niagara ice wine at Christmas, that I was the only family she'd ever needed. I'd laughed it off. You know how you do. The estate, her house in Kelowna, her investment accounts, her RRSPs rolled into a spousal equivalent trust, came to just over $2.8 million. I'm 63 years old. I'd worked 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a school board in Sudbury. I had a modest RRSP of my own, a paid-off house, and a husband named Colin who had spent most of our 42-year marriage being exactly the kind of man who looks dependable from the outside. I hung up the phone and stood very still for a moment. Then I thought, I have to tell Colin. That was my first instinct. After 42 years, it's automatic. The good news, the bad news, the mundane and the extraordinary, you turn to the person beside you and you say, "Can you believe this?" It never occurred to me not to tell him. I loved my husband. I trusted him. That's what I believed on that Tuesday morning in October. I called his cell. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. Colin worked in commercial real estate. He'd been in the business for over 20 years, ran his own small brokerage out of downtown Sudbury. He kept irregular hours. That was just the nature of the work, he always said. Meetings ran long. Clients needed him in the evenings. I'd long since stopped expecting him home for dinner at any particular time, so I got in my car and drove to his office. It was a 20-minute drive. I was still a little stunned, honestly, the kind of stunned where you're smiling to yourself at red lights because the world has shifted and you haven't quite processed it yet. I remember thinking about Evelyn, about how she used to do the crossword every morning with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. I was thinking about calling our cousin in Vancouver. I was thinking about nothing really bad at all. His office was on the second floor of a brick building on Elm Street. The receptionist, a young woman named, well, it doesn't matter what her name was, she looked up when I came in and something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly, more like the particular expression of someone who's been quietly dreading a specific moment and has just realized it's arrived. "Is Colin in?" I asked. He's in a meeting," she said. "That's all right," I said. "I'm his wife. I'll just pop my head in." She stood up. "Mrs. Wife, I'll just pop my head in." She stood up. But I was already at the door. I don't think I need to describe in detail what I saw. You understand. After 42 years, you understand in the first half second, before your brain has even finished forming the thought. The woman, I'll call her what she was, which is a colleague, someone who worked in a neighbouring brokerage on the same floor. A woman I had met at a company Christmas party and shaken hands with, and thought nothing of. She scrambled for her jacket. Colin stood up. He said my name. I closed the door. I walked back through the reception area. The receptionist said something. I didn't hear it. I went down the stairs and sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel for a very long time. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry. I did not cry. I did not drive home and start throwing his things into garbage bags. What I did was sit there in that parking lot and feel something very cold and very quiet settle over me. It felt, if I'm honest, like clarity. Like when the fog finally lifts off Georgian Bay in the morning and you can see exactly where the rocks are. Colin came out of the building about 15 minutes later. He put his coat on. He walked toward my car and stood by the passenger window, and I rolled it down. He said, "Eleanor, I'm sorry." I said, "How long?" He looked away. "A while." "How long, Colin?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, 6 years. 6 years. Our youngest grandchild was 4 years old. I'd been a grandmother twice over in those 6 years. I'd had knee surgery. I'd retired and gone back to part-time work because I missed having somewhere to be. We'd gone to Portugal for our 40th anniversary, 6 years. Go back inside, I said, and I drove home. Now, here is the part of this story that I think about most, the part I should have seen and didn't, and maybe couldn't have, but maybe could have. When I got home and sat at my kitchen table, I called my daughter Fiona. She drove over from her place in the New Sudbury area and sat with me for hours that night. She was furious, understandably. She wanted me to call a lawyer immediately, pack his things, change the locks. She's always been the direct one. But it was Fiona who also said gently, after we'd been talking for a while, "Mum, the money from Aunt Evelyn, did you tell him about it?" I had, not in person. I hadn't managed to actually speak to him before I drove to his office, but I texted him from my car in that parking lot before he came down. I got a call from Evelyn's lawyer. She left me everything. "Call me when you can." I'd sent it before I went in, because that was my reflex. Good news first, share it with your husband. He'd read that message before he came to my window. He knew. Fiona looked at me very carefully. "Mum," she said, "you need to talk to a family lawyer. Not tomorrow. Tonight, if possible." I didn't understand why she was so urgent about it. I'm not a naive woman. I spent 3 decades managing school board administration. I understand bureaucracy and paperwork and how institutions protect themselves. But I didn't understand, in that moment, what I was actually at risk of. The lawyer I reached that evening, a woman who specialised in family law in Sudbury, explained it to me very plainly. In Ontario, inheritance is generally excluded from the division of family property in a divorce, provided it's kept separate. But if inherited money gets mixed into joint accounts, used for joint purposes, deposited into shared investments, it can become very complicated. Very quickly. "Your husband now knows you have a significant inheritance coming," she said. "If he's been planning an exit for some time, that changes his calculations." I asked her what she meant by planning an exit. She paused. Then she said, "Has your husband ever discussed retirement plans with you? Talked about the future? Or has he been vague, non-committal, making no real joint plans?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Colin had, for the past couple of years, been oddly uninterested in the renovations I'd wanted to do on the house. He'd declined to contribute to a joint travel fund I'd tried to set up. He'd been quietly removing himself from our shared financial life in small ways I'd attributed to stress at work, to his general tendency toward financial conservatism. "He's been stalling," the lawyer said. "Or he may have been. We don't know yet. But we need to find out." What we found out over the following months was this. Colin had been moving money, small amounts at first, redirecting commission payments, routing certain transactions to a numbered company he'd set up 3 years earlier. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have caught my attention on a credit card statement or a bank notice. He'd become, over years of quiet, patient work, very good at making money disappear sideways into accounts I didn't know existed. The forensic accountant my lawyer retained, a practical, no-nonsense woman out of Toronto who testified in dozens of family law cases, told me it wasn't unusual. "People in real estate have more opportunity than most," she said. "Cash transactions, holding companies, referral fees paid to numbered entities. It's not difficult if you're patient and you know what you're doing." Colin knew what he was doing. He had, by the time we separated formally, moved approximately $340,000 out of what should have been marital assets. That's a number that sounds abstract until you realize it represents nearly a decade of careful, deliberate theft from our shared life. He had not yet made a move to divorce me. My lawyer's theory, and I believe she was right, was that he'd been waiting for Evelyn's estate to clear, waiting for that money to land in my accounts, at which point he planned to initiate divorce proceedings, argue that the inheritance had become commingled with family property, and use the resulting legal chaos to negotiate from a position of strength. He'd been waiting, in other words, to use my dead sister's gift to me as a weapon. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I think people sometimes expect a certain kind of dramatic response. Rage, tears, a confrontation. What I actually felt was something quieter and, in a strange way, more permanent. It felt like grief. Not for the marriage. I think I'd been grieving that for years without knowing it. It was grief for the version of myself who had trusted him completely, who had stood in a parking lot and texted, "I got the best news," to a man who was upstairs with another woman because sharing good news with him was still my first instinct. That version of me was gone. She didn't come back. The next months were not simple or clean. Colin, when confronted through lawyers with the evidence of the financial irregularities, became difficult. He hired an aggressive family law solicitor who filed motions and counterclaims and made the process as slow and expensive as possible. He tried for a while to characterize his management of our finances as conservative asset protection that had been for both our benefits. Our son Ryan called me one evening and asked if I had considered mediation. He said he thought a courtroom battle would hurt everyone. He said he was worried about his father. He said he hoped I could find it in my heart to approach this collaboratively. I listened to him very carefully. Then I said, "Your father moved over $300,000 that belonged to both of us into accounts I didn't know about. I didn't find out because I trusted him. Collaboration has not historically served me well in this relationship." Ryan went quiet. Then he said, "I just think there are two sides." "There are," I said, "but both sides are mine." He didn't call again for several weeks. I don't say that with any satisfaction. He's my son, and I love him. But I was 63 years old, and I had spent 4 decades making things easier for people who were not making things easier for me. And I was finished. My daughter Fiona, for her part, was extraordinary. She came with me to every meeting I was allowed to bring someone to. She researched. She asked the right questions. She once, in a lawyer's boardroom, calmly corrected a claim Colin's lawyer was making about asset valuation with a printed document she'd pulled from a land registry database the night before. The lawyer looked at her with what I can only describe as respectful alarm. "Where did she learn to do that?" my lawyer asked me afterward. "From me," I said, which was true. I spent 31 years managing administrative systems. I know how paperwork works. I knew how to teach my daughter to read it. There was a moment, about 7 months into the proceedings, when Colin's lawyer made an approach about settlement. Colin, it turned out, had underestimated something. The forensic accountant's report was more thorough than he'd anticipated. It traced not just the moved funds, but the pattern of movement. And patterns are very hard to argue against in family court. His lawyer suggested a number. It was not a good number. My lawyer looked at me. I looked at the offer. I said no. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I was not doing this out of revenge. I'm aware that revenge is a word people reach for in these situations. Scorned woman, bitter divorce. She wanted to make him suffer. That's not what this was. What this was accurate accounting. What had been taken from me, I wanted returned. The financial irregularities alone represented a significant portion of what we would have split equitably in a straightforward divorce. I was not asking for more than what was fair. I was asking for exactly what was fair, which is a different thing, and which Colin had spent 6 years quietly making sure I would not receive. We settled 14 months after that Tuesday in October. The terms are private, as these things are. What I can tell you is that Evelyn's money stayed entirely separate. My lawyer had ensured it was handled correctly from the first week, never touched a joint account, never mingled with anything Colin could claim a share of. My sister had been wiser than I'd given her credit for. She'd structured the estate in a way that, my lawyer said, seemed almost purposefully protective of a sole beneficiary. Maybe Evelyn had known something about Colin that she'd never said to me directly. Or maybe she was just a careful woman who knew that the people you love most are sometimes the people you most need to protect yourself from. I think about that sometimes. Colin moved to his colleague's condo in downtown Sudbury. I don't know how that ended or if it's still ongoing. I found I genuinely didn't care. Ryan came back around eventually. He's a good person underneath the discomfort. He'd just been scared and caught between his parents and had made the mistake of thinking equivocation was the same as fairness. He apologized properly, not in the vague way people apologize when they want credit without accountability, but in the real way, where he sat at my kitchen table and said, "I should have been on your side from the beginning. I'm sorry I wasn't." I told him I forgave him, because I did, and because I could see it cost him something to say it. Fiona still calls every Sunday. We went to Kelowna last spring to deal with Evelyn's house, sorting through her things, deciding what to keep, what to give away. We found in Evelyn's study a framed cross-stitch she'd done herself sometime in the 1980s. It said, "A woman who knows her own worth needs no one to confirm it." Fiona photographed it on her phone. She made it her lock screen. I kept the original. It's on my wall now, in the house that is entirely mine, in Sudbury, where the birch trees are going gold again, and the tea is warm in my hands, and the morning is quiet, in the way that only mornings can be, when you were finally free. Evelyn always was the smartest one of us. I just needed a little longer to understand what she was trying to tell me. There's a particular kind of reckoning that comes quietly, not all at once. Mine came in pieces, in a parking lot in October, at a kitchen table with my daughter, in a boardroom where a forensic accountant laid out 14 months of a man's careful, patient dishonesty in a series of spreadsheets. I used to think that loyalty was its own protection, that if you gave enough of it, lived honestly enough, worked hard enough inside a marriage, the goodness of that would somehow come back to you. I don't believe that anymore. Not because I became cynical, but because I finally understood what loyalty actually requires. It requires judgment. It requires you to extend it to people who have earned it, and to recognize, clearly and without flinching, when someone has not. Colin didn't stumble into betrayal. He chose it slowly, over years, and then he chose it again every single day he came home and sat across from me at dinner. That's a moral failure, and I've stopped looking for a softer word for it. What people do in the quiet, when no one is watching, when there's no immediate consequence, that's who they are. I learned that at 63, and I wish I'd understood it sooner, that I don't think I would have believed it before I had to. What saved me, practically speaking, was that I didn't panic. I didn't act from anger. I sat in that parking lot and I let the clarity come. And then I called a lawyer before the end of the day. My daughter Fiona had the presence of mind to ask the right question at the right moment, about the money, about what I'd already told him, and that question changed everything. That's what clear thinking does. It creates options where there weren't any before. I've spent my whole career in administration, and I can tell you that the people who survive difficult institutions are not the ones who react fastest. They're the ones who read the room accurately and move deliberately. That capacity to stay sharp when everything in you wants to fall apart is something you can practice. It's something worth practicing before you need it. And then there's the question of getting back up. 14 months of legal proceedings when you're in your 60s, when you thought your future was settled, when the person fighting you across a boardroom table is someone you once loved. That takes something out of you that doesn't fully come back. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it also showed me what I was made of, and I hadn't known. Not really. I've been competent my whole life without ever being tested the way this tested me. There is a kind of strength that you don't discover until the moment it's required, and the only way to find out you have it is to need it. Evelyn knew something I didn't. She structured her estate the way she did for a reason, and whether that reason was wisdom or intuition, or simply the careful habits of a woman who had always looked after herself, it protected me when I couldn't protect myself. The cross-stitch on my wall says what she never said out loud. A woman who knows her own worth needs no one to confirm it. I'm still learning what that means, but for the first time in a very long time, I have the space to figure it out.